I was standing at the front door of a house I had helped renovate when my daughter-in-law opened it just wide enough to make me feel like a stranger. She had the kind of smile that people practice in mirrors, the kind that never quite reaches the eyes. You know what she said to me? She said I was making things awkward. That was the evening I understood, with a clarity that felt almost physical, what it means when people treat your generosity as an obligation. The October air in Guelph carried that particular chill that only southern Ontario knows how to deliver, sharp, honest, with the smell of wet leaves and wood smoke threading through it. I had baked a butter tart loaf that afternoon, the same recipe I had made for every Thanksgiving, every birthday, every quiet Sunday for 30 years. I held it carefully against my chest as I stood on that porch, as though the warmth of it might protect me from what was coming. My daughter-in-law, Sandra, had opened the door only part way, her body filling the gap like a polite barricade. Her hair was freshly blown out. Behind her, I could see the dining room lit with the warm glow of the pendant lights my son Daniel had asked me to help pay for when they renovated 2 years ago. The table was set with the good plates. People were laughing somewhere deeper in the house. "Dorothy," she said, softening her voice the way people do when they want to say something hard without sounding harsh. "We should have texted you sooner. Tonight is really more of a colleague thing. It might be a bit much for you. A bit much. As if I were something fragile, something that needed to be managed." I shifted the loaf in my arms. The foil wrapping made a small sound in the quiet between us, and I was embarrassed by it. Before I could answer, Daniel appeared at her shoulder. My son. The boy I raised on a nurse's wage in this very city. The one whose university tuition I paid in full, whose first car I co-signed for, whose down payment I quietly contributed to when he and Sandra bought the house in Kitchener. He did not look at me directly. His eyes moved past me, to the street, to the neighbors' lit windows, anywhere but my face. "Mom," he said carefully, "we're keeping tonight kind of curated. Some of Sandra's work contacts are here. It might feel uncomfortable for everyone. Uncomfortable for everyone. As though my presence were a variable that disrupted their carefully arranged equation." "I thought I was family," I said. Sandra smoothed the front of her blouse. It was a beautiful blouse. The kind of blouse that costs more than my weekly grocery budget. "We just need some boundaries, Dorothy. Honestly, you have a tendency to make yourself very present in our lives, and we feel like we need room to breathe. You should try living a little smaller. It would be good for all of us. Living smaller." In the house they renovated with my help. At the door of the grandchildren I had picked up from school twice a week for 3 years. I nodded because I could not find a single word that would not break if I tried to say it out loud. I turned and walked back down the front steps. The porch light did not follow me. It clicked off before I reached my car. That small mechanical sound, the indifferent click of a light switch, is something I still hear sometimes at the edge of sleep. The drive back to my house in Guelph took 40 minutes. I did not turn on the radio. The butter tart loaf sat on the passenger seat, and by the time I pulled into my driveway, it had gone cold. I left it in the car. I could not explain why, but carrying it inside felt like admitting something I was not ready to admit. My house greeted me with darkness and the familiar creak of the floors. I did not turn on the lights right away. I stood in the kitchen for a long moment, one hand on the counter, letting my eyes adjust and letting the evening settle into something I could examine more honestly. It was not just the dinner. It was not just Sandra's voice, careful and condescending. It was everything I had allowed to accumulate over the years. Every time I convinced myself that being useful was the same as being loved. Every time I wrote a transfer and told myself it was just a temporary thing, just until they got on their feet, just until the business stabilized, just until... I pulled open the bottom drawer of the kitchen hutch. the one that sticks in winter because the wood swells with the cold. Inside was a folder I had kept for 2 years. I had labeled it Household Support in my own handwriting, and seeing those words now, in my own careful cursive, felt like reading a sentence I had written in my sleep. I carried the folder to the kitchen table and sat down under the overhead light. I laid the pages out one by one. The RESP contributions for both grandchildren that I had been topping up each year, Daniel's car payment after he upgraded to the newer model, the roof repair on the Kitchener house that came up suddenly last spring, Sandra's business insurance, which she had asked me to cover just for the first year 2 years ago, the family vacation to Portugal that I had paid half of because they said it would be good for the kids to travel, monthly contributions to their grocery budget during a stretch when Daniel said things were tight, the new washer and dryer they needed urgently when their old set broke, their property tax installment last February when, as Sandra put it, cash flow was complicated that month. I kept counting. My finger moved down each page slowly, the way you read a document when you need to make certain you are not misreading it. 93 separate payments or contributions over 4 years. 93. I sat back in my chair. My breath caught in a way that had nothing to do with air. The number was not the worst part. The worst part was that I had to sit in the dark in my own kitchen, alone to count them. Because not once had Daniel or Sandra ever acknowledged the total. Not one. I looked around my kitchen. The backsplash tiles had been cracked for 2 years and I had not replaced them. My winter coat was in its 5th season. The furnace had been making a sound I had been ignoring since September because I kept telling myself I would deal with it after the holidays. My registered retirement savings had been drawn down more than I had ever planned, and my pension from the hospital, the one I had spent 31 years earning, did not stretch the way it once did. Living smaller, Sandra had said. I was already living small. I had been living small for years so that their life could stay large. I closed the folder. In the quiet kitchen, the sound of it was very definitive. I did not sleep much that night. By morning, I had made my decision. I dressed without particular care, which is its own kind of intention. I poured tea and let it go cold beside the sink. Then I picked up the folder and drove to my branch of the Royal Bank on Stone Road. The morning was gray and damp, the kind of November day that settles into your coat. I had banked at this branch for over 25 years. The manager, a composed woman named Patricia Osei, who had helped me through the financial rearrangements after my husband passed, was at her desk when I arrived. She looked up and read my expression without needing to ask. "Dorothy," she said, rising. "Come in. Close the door." I sat across from her and placed the folder between us. Patricia was one of those people who does not fill silence unnecessarily. She waited. "I need to stop all automatic transfers to my son's accounts," I said. "Everything. All of them. Today." She opened the folder. She read slowly, her expression professionally composed, though I could see her absorbing the scale of it. She turned several pages before she looked up. 93 contributions over 4 years, she said, not as a question, simply as an acknowledgement that she had read correctly. "Stopping everything will cause immediate disruption on their end." "Yes," I said. "I understand that." She studied me for a moment. "All right." She turned to her computer and began entering the cancellations. Then she paused. Her posture changed slightly, the small shift that means something unexpected has appeared on a screen. "Dorothy," she said carefully, "before we continue, I need to show you something." She turned the monitor toward me. "A request was submitted to access your investment account last month, a pre-authorization inquiry. It was flagged by our system because the signature on the request did not match your verified signature on file." The room felt very still. "A request from whom?" I asked. Patricia hesitated the way people do when the answer is something they wish they did not have to say. The contact name on the inquiry was Sandra. I felt it move through me like cold water. Sandra had not just taken my support for granted. She had been testing a door, not asking me for money this time, trying to find a way to reach it herself. Did it go through? No. The inconsistency triggered an automatic freeze on the inquiry. It was never processed. But Dorothy, this does not look like an error. I kept my hands flat on the arms of the chair to keep them steady. Then add fraud alerts to every account. Revoke Daniel's signing authority on anything that still carries his name. Change my security questions. Change everything that can be changed. Patricia held my gaze with the quiet steadiness of someone who has sat across from many people at difficult turning points. We will protect your accounts completely, she said. I will also recommend you speak to someone in our estate planning team this week, given what you have shown me here. As I signed the revised documents, my hand did not tremble. The pen moved clearly and deliberately across each line. When I stepped outside, the gray morning felt different than it had on the way in. Not lighter, exactly, but more mine. I had just set my keys on the kitchen counter and put the kettle on when the first message arrived. It was from Sandra. Straight to the point, no greeting. Dorothy, the Netflix family plan is showing an error. Can you update the payment info? I set the phone face down and waited for the kettle. 3 minutes later, also Daniel's gym membership came back declined. Please sort this out today. Please sort this out. As though I were an assistant who had been slow with a task. I made my tea. I took it to the kitchen window and looked at the backyard, at the garden beds I had put to sleep for winter, the perennial border I had planted the year my husband and I moved in. I had been tending that garden for 22 years. It asked very little and gave back every spring without fail. I had been thinking of that lately, the way things that are tended honestly tend to be honest in return. The phone continued. Daniel this time. Mom. The mortgage pre-authorized payment didn't go through. What happened? Call me. Then, Mom, I need you to fix this today. We have people coming this weekend. Then, Mom, this is serious. I took my tea to the garden chair on the back porch. The cold was manageable if you dressed for it, and I had dressed for it. I pulled my coat tighter and let the phone continue in my pocket. The messages came in clusters, the tone shifting from impatient to confused to something closer to alarm. By mid-afternoon, Sandra's messages had taken on a sharper edge. Dorothy, if you are doing this deliberately, you need to understand how immature this looks. We will be forced to take this to someone who can help mediate. You are creating a situation that affects the children, and I think you need to reconsider before this becomes something none of us can walk back from. A threat, dressed up carefully in concern for the children. I deleted the message. Then I powered off the phone. That evening, my neighbor Gary, who shovels the sidewalk between our properties every winter without being asked, waved to me from his driveway. Saw your son driving past a couple times this afternoon, he said. Slowed down in front of your place each time. Didn't stop, though. I thanked him and went inside and turned the deadbolt. The confrontation arrived the next morning. Not a knock. The front door opened because Daniel still had a key, a fact I noted and would address before the afternoon was over. I was at the kitchen counter, hands around a mug of coffee, when he came in. He looked like he had not slept. His coat was not done up properly, and his hair had not been combed. He was a man whose familiar landscape had been rearranged overnight, and who had not yet found his footing in the new geography. Mom. His voice was tight. What did you do? I set my mug down. You should knock, Daniel. This is still my home. He did not seem to hear me. He moved to the center of the kitchen, the way people pace when they are too agitated to stand still. The mortgage payment bounced. The car insurance lapsed. Sandra's business account is short. The kids' RESP contributions didn't go in. Mom, do you understand what this does to us? Do you understand how embarrassing this is? Embarrassing. The word landed with a particular weight, because it was exactly the word Sandra had used on the porch 2 nights ago. Their concern was not for their finances. Their concern was for how things looked. Sit down, Daniel. I don't want to sit down. Then stand. But listen to me. I lifted the folder from the counter and placed it on the table between us. 93 payments, 93 contributions to your life in the last 4 years. Your mortgage installment, your car, Sandra's insurance, your children's education savings, your vacation, your appliances, your property tax, all of it is in this folder. He stared at it. He did not reach for it. Mom, I didn't know it was that. That is the problem, I said. You didn't know. You never asked. You never added it up. You were busy living your life, and I was quietly funding it. And it was easier for both of us to let that continue than to have this conversation. He ran a hand through his hair. His voice dropped. What are we supposed to do now? We can't just overnight. You are going to do what every other family does, I said. You are going to look at what you earn, and you are going to live within it. You both have good incomes. You have choices. You simply chose not to make them because you didn't have to. Something moved across his face that I had not seen in a long time. Something underneath the panic, the beginning of understanding. Sandra wants to talk to a family lawyer, he said. She thinks she says that at your age, with the amounts involved, there might be grounds to argue you weren't making these decisions clearly. I had expected something like this. I had prepared for it the way you prepare for a weather event you know is coming, quietly, without drama and well in advance. Sandra already tried to access my investment account, I said. The bank flagged the attempt because the signature was inconsistent. I have the documentation. I also have 31 years of employment records from the hospital, a current letter from my GP, and a financial record showing every transfer I made voluntarily, with dates, from an account only I controlled. I held his gaze steadily. If Sandra wishes to speak to a lawyer, that is her right. So is everything that follows from it. For a long moment he could not speak. His mouth opened and closed once. Then he said quietly, She tried to access your accounts. She did. He sat down. The chair caught him more than he sat. He put his elbows on the table and pressed his hands over his face, and the silence that followed was the kind that precedes something real. When he finally looked up, he looked younger than he had in years, younger and more tired and more honest. Mom, he said, I didn't know about that. I want you to know that. I believe you, I said, because I did. He left without resolution, without promises, without the usual smoothing over. He left with the folder in his hands and something unfamiliar in his eyes. I stood at the kitchen window and watched his car back out of the driveway, and I felt something settle in my chest that had not been still in a very long time. The days that followed were quieter than I expected. I kept to my routines. Morning walks on the trail behind the subdivision while the frost was still on the grass. Afternoons in the kitchen or the garden, doing the small repairs I had been postponing. I called a furnace technician. I booked the tile work for the backsplash. I bought a winter coat, a proper one, the kind with real insulation, in a deep teal color I had always liked but never let myself choose. Word travels in a city like Guelph, especially through the particular network of women in their 60s who have known each other for decades, through hospital staff associations and church committees and the informal channels of a neighborhood where people have lived side by side long enough to know each other's cars. My friend Marguerite mentioned, without seeming to intend it as news, that Sandra's real estate staging business had lost 2 client contracts in the same week. My former colleague Helen said she had run into Daniel at the Costco on Woodlawn looking, in her words, like a man recalculating. I did not feel satisfaction at this. I want to be precise about that. What I felt was closer to the feeling of watching a structure find its true level. Not pleasure. Recognition. The envelope arrived on a Thursday, slid through the mail slot while I was in the garden. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded once. It was from my granddaughter Emma. She was 22, in her second year of a nursing program at Conestoga, and we had always had the kind of closeness that does not require explanation. She wrote in the careful, slightly formal way she had when she wanted to be taken seriously. "Grandma, I found some papers in the house last week when I stopped by to pick up my winter things. They were on the desk in the home office. I don't know if I was supposed to see them. I photographed them because I thought you should know." She had included 3 photographs, printed on plain paper. I sat down at the kitchen table with them. They were pages from what appeared to be a home equity line of credit application. The property address was my house on Waterloo Avenue. The applicant line had my name on it, filled in by hand. The signature on the bottom of the second page was, "Not mine." I sat with those pages for a long time. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, the last of the afternoon light moved slowly across the floor. This was not impulsive. This was not Sandra testing a door out of desperation. This was something that had been planned and prepared, with my address and my name and a forged signature designed to bind me to a debt I did not know existed for a property I owned outright. The HELOC amount listed was $240,000. I called Patricia at the bank. Then I called the non-emergency line for the Guelph Police Service. Then I called my own lawyer, a woman named Claire Holbrook, who had handled my husband's estate, and I told her I needed an appointment the following morning. Claire arrived at my house at 9 with coffee and a legal pad, because she is the kind of lawyer who comes to you when the situation calls for it. We sat at the kitchen table and I showed her everything: the folder, the bank documents, the flagged pre-authorization attempt, and Emma's photographs. Claire read carefully and said very little until she had seen everything. Then she looked up. "Dorothy," she said, "you have done exactly the right things in exactly the right order. The bank documentation alone is significant. With the photographs your granddaughter provided, this is a complete record." She paused. "I want you to understand what this means legally. What has been attempted here is fraud. The forged signature on a credit application is a criminal matter, not a civil one. This is not a family dispute. This is something that the police and potentially the Crown will be involved in, regardless of your personal wishes regarding your son." I had known this, somewhere underneath everything else, from the moment I sat down with those printed photographs. I nodded. "I understand," I said. The weeks that followed moved at the particular pace of legal and institutional processes, which is to say they moved slowly and with great deliberateness. Claire liaised with the bank. The Guelph police opened a file. A detective called me twice to take my account and to walk me through what the investigation would involve. Sandra retained a lawyer of her own. Daniel retained a separate one. Through all of this, my son called me twice. The first call was short and stunned, and not quite coherent. The call of a man learning the full dimensions of something he had chosen not to look at. The second call was different. He called on a Sunday evening, and he spoke for a long time, without deflection, without asking me to minimize or accommodate or make it smaller than it was. He said he had not known about the credit application. I told him I believed him. He said he did not know how to account for the years of not noticing, of not asking, of letting the arrangement continue because it was easier than examining it. I told him that not knowing is not the same as being innocent, but that it is also not the same as being complicit. There is a distinction that matters, and I was willing to hold it. Emma came by on a Saturday morning with groceries and a tin of her mother's shortbread cookies. which, under the circumstances, I found quietly funny, and which Emma seemed to as well. She sat at my kitchen table for 3 hours. She was doing well in her program. She was tired in the particular way of people who are working hard at something that matters to them, which is a good kind of tired. She had a part-time job at a pharmacy on the weekend. She was paying her own phone bill, her own textbooks, her own transit pass. She had done this quietly and without announcement, and I had not known until she mentioned it almost incidentally. I didn't want to be like she started, and then stopped. "I know," I said. She looked at the table. "I love my mom. I want you to know that." But I watched what happened for a long time, and I didn't say anything because I didn't think it was my place. And then I found those papers and I knew I had to. She looked up. "Was it the right thing to do?" "Yes," I said, without hesitation. "It was exactly the right thing." She nodded. Her eyes were bright. "I'm thinking about specializing in geriatric care," she said. "I think there are a lot of people in situations," she paused again, choosing her words, "where the people who are supposed to look after them are actually the risk." She was 22 years old. She already understood something that I had taken 68 years to see clearly. Daniel came to my door on a cold evening in late November, without Sandra, without the children, alone. He had called first to ask if he could come, which I noted and appreciated. He stood on the porch in a coat I did not recognize. A plain, sensible coat, not one of the tailored ones he had been wearing for the past several years, and he looked like a man who had recently set something down that he had been carrying at an angle for a long time. I made tea. We sat at the kitchen table where we had sat for every difficult conversation of his childhood, and the familiarity of it was both comforting and painful in equal measure. He did not ask for anything. He did not apologize in the performed way people apologize when they are hoping the apology will close a door. He spoke for a while about the things he was beginning to understand, about the years of taking without accounting, about the way comfort can become a kind of blindness, about Emma, about what it meant that his own daughter had been the one to bring him the truth. He spoke about Sandra carefully and without blaming, in the way of a man who is in the middle of something he has not yet fully named. I listened. I did not fill the silence when it came. At the end, he said, "Mom, I don't know how long it takes to rebuild something like this. I don't know if you will want to. But I want you to know that I'm not asking you for anything, not for help with the legal costs, not for anything. I'm going to stand in whatever comes from this, and I'm going to stand in it myself." "Good," I said. "That is the right thing." He left before 9. I stood at the window for a while after his taillights had gone, watching the quiet street. The snow had started, the first real snow of the season, the kind that falls straight down in the windless cold and settles evenly on everything, fair and indifferent, covering the driveways and the garden beds and the old crack in the front walk that I had been meaning to repair. I went back to the kitchen. I pulled my knitting basket from beside the armchair. I was working on a hat for Emma, a thick cabled pattern in a deep green wool she had admired in a shop window once, and mentioned only once, because she is not the kind of person who says things twice hoping to be heard. I had remembered. I knit for a long time that evening, the needles moving in the quiet, familiar rhythm. Outside, the snow kept coming. The furnace, freshly serviced, ran smoothly. The kitchen was warm. The backsplash was whole. I thought about what it had cost me to arrive at this table, at this evening, at this particular quiet. Not the money. The money was a fact. Documented, addressed, moving through the legal channels it needed to move through. I meant the other cost. The years of arranging myself around other people's needs until I had become primarily an arrangement, a function, a resource, rather than a person at the center of her own life. I had thought I was being generous. I had been. But I had also been afraid, in ways I was only now beginning to name, afraid that if I stopped being useful, I would stop being loved, afraid that the distance between myself and my son would grow into something permanent if I did not keep filling it with money and accommodation and quiet sacrifice. I had believed, without ever quite saying it, that I could purchase closeness, that if I gave enough, consistently enough, gracefully enough, the relationship would hold. It had not held. It had instead become a transaction. And the people on the other side of a transaction do not love you. They manage you. I set the knitting down for a moment and looked out the window at the snow. What I felt sitting there was not bitterness. I want to be clear about that, because bitterness would have been easier in some ways. It would have given me a clean, hard thing to hold. What I actually felt was more complicated and more honest. Grief for the years. Clarity about the present. Something that was only beginning to resemble peace, the kind that is not a feeling so much as an orientation, a decision to stand in your own life and let it be what it actually is. I picked up the knitting again. The cable pattern required attention. Each row a deliberate choice, each stitch accountable to the one before it. I found it settling, the precision of it, the way it held you to the present and asked nothing beyond the next movement of your hands. The hat was going to be very good. Emma was going to wear it all winter, I was almost certain, because she is practical and unsentimental in all the right ways, and she would choose warmth over fashion without a second thought. She would wear it with her nursing scrubs and her good winter boots, and she would walk through the world she was building for herself with the same directness she had brought to my kitchen table, and I intended to be there to see it. In the spring, when the perennial border came back, I was going to plant something new in the bed along the south fence. I had been looking at climbing hydrangeas, the kind that take several years to establish, but then come back every season stronger than before, requiring very little once they have taken proper root. Some things, tended honestly, do not need to be replaced. They simply need the right conditions and enough time to become what they were always going to be. I finished the row. Outside, the snow fell on.